Thank you, everyone. I must say I'm surprised. I thought there'd be hardly anybody here tonight, given that it's the first night back and it's still not exactly summer. But anyway, it's lovely to see people, and it's lovely to see people face to face instead of staring into a computer screen. So we might make a start, eh? Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho. Jacharana sampanno sugato lokavidu anutaro purisa dhamma sarati sata deva manusanang buddho bhagavati Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanaiko Pachatang Veditavo Vinuhiti Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sankho Uju Patipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sankho Naya Patipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sankho Samichi Patipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sankho Yadidang Chatari Purisa Yugani Ata Purisa Pugala Esa Bhagavato Sāvaka Sankho Ahunneyo Ahunneyo Dakineyo Anjali Karaniyo Anutarang Punyaketang Lokasati. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you to those people who are taking part in tonight via Zoom as well. I feel a bit like a Jain priest sitting here wearing this because that's one of the things that they do, so they don't breathe in any insects or anything. Anyway, we live in strange times. So tonight I thought it would be nice and good to remind you of a couple of teachings of the Buddha to get started again, especially in this face-to-face format. And I'd like to put in front of you the teachings, or two of the most famous teachings that the Buddha gave to his son Rahula. Rahula in a way, is a strange figure in the life of the Buddha, and certainly in the Buddhist suttas and sutras, because he appears in the in the Mahayana tradition as well. And some of you might remember that there are various versions about the birth of Rahula. Some say that he was born, and it was that very night when he was born that the Buddha then left the palace and left Yasodhara. Some say that he wasn't born for 6 weeks after, in different tradition again. And they have various reasons for saying that. But in the traditional account, we're told that Yasodhara gives birth to Rahula, and the Buddha goes and puts his head in the door, basically, and sees her and sees Rahula, and he gives the baby the name Rahula. And then he doesn't touch the baby, and he leaves. And in one version of the story, his parents are supposed to not know what's going on, and in the more traditional version, they do know what's going on. They're not happy about it, but nonetheless. And the Buddha has, as far as the ruling house, so to speak, is concerned, he's done his duty because there's an heir now, so he can kind of leave. And in a way, this is in keeping with the traditional early Hindu view that once you've had children and so on, or grandchildren, then you can go off and follow a spiritual path. Rahula is translated in English as a fetter, that is, as something that binds you or holds you. But also in Pali and in Sanskrit, it can mean the evil demon that causes the total eclipse, called Rahu. So when there's a total eclipse, the belief was that this demon passed across and blanked out the light of the sun or the moon, whatever it was. Either way, it's not a terribly pleasant name to give a child. And we're told that the Buddha gave him this name. So poor old Rahula gets a rough start in life. And later, when the Buddha returns to see his family, Yasodhara and so on, the story goes that Yasodhara takes Rahula to the Buddha and says to the Buddha, now you can give him his inheritance. What she meant was, and certainly what the ruling elite meant was, you can now hand over to him your birthright, which was to be the ruler of the Sakyans. And instead of that, the Buddha says, Rahula, come here, I'll give you the best thing that I've ever found. And so the Buddha then gives him a little teaching, and then he asks, I think it's Sariputta, to ordain him as a novice. And according to tradition, he's the very first novice ever ordained. Because the others, remember the other early bhikkhus, they were all adults. So they didn't need, excuse me, they didn't need a novice ordination. And you can only imagine what the Buddha's family might have thought of this, because there goes the son and heir out the door with this bunch of, samanera. Anyway, that's the story, roughly. And Rahula then travels with the Buddha and with those early disciples. And the two teachings that I'd like to give you both come from the Majjhima Nikaya. And the first one is is known as the teaching to Rahula, or the instruction to Rahula at the place called Mango Stone. And then the second one is called the Maharahula Order Sutta, the great teaching to Rahula. And they're very interesting teachings, and I personally I like them a lot because I think we can actually gain a lot from listening to them and trying to sort of tease out the teaching. Both of them use really tangible images. Yeah, they're not sort of theories about the nature of things. They're really concrete teachings, and I think it's good to I think it's good to stick to that kind of thing instead of theories about things. Stick to things that you can touch. Yeah, touch with the hands, touch with the mind, touch with the heart. And so in this teaching, yeah, it says, I've heard that on one occasion, the Blessed One was staying near Rajgaha at the bamboo grove, the squirrel's feeding ground. Oh, there were such great names of these places. It's not like Homebush Bay. At that time, Venerable Rahula was staying at Mango Stone. Then the Blessed One, arising from his seclusion in the late afternoon, that is, he was doing some practice, yeah, or he may have been having a little rest. Yeah? In Thailand, the monks very often will go and have a sleep in the early afternoon, yeah, because it's hot, it's kind of a bit unpleasant, and so on. Excuse me. So Rahula saw the Buddha coming from a distance, and on seeing him, he put out a seat and water for washing the feet. This is a really ancient custom in many, many cultures. Yeah? When a guest arrives, particularly, people walking around with just sandals or no shoes at all, you put some water out, you make a seat for them to sit on as a sign of respect and welcome and so on. It's a bit like in the Islamic tradition, the offering of food to strangers. You never ever turn a stranger away. So the Buddha sits down and he washes his feet, washes his own feet, notice, yeah. And then Rahula bows down, excuse me, bows down to the Buddha and then sits to one side. And most of you will know that this business of sitting to one side, again, is a mark of respect. You don't sit right in front of the person, yeah, and sort of stare at them. You sit to one side, which is very, very polite. And then the Buddha, after washing his feet, he lifts up the dipper. Very often, well, these days in Thailand, it'd be a piece of plastic, like the cut-off bottom of a plastic drink bottle, nailed onto a stick. But in these days, it would have been a timber or a bamboo dipper with a little handle on it, and you would dip it into the water and then pour it over your feet. So the Buddha takes this dipper, and there's a little tiny bit of water left in the bottom of it. And he says to Rahula, do you see this little bit of leftover water remaining in the water dipper? And Rahula says, yes. And he says, well, that's how little of a contemplative there is in anyone who feels no shame at telling a deliberate lie. Yeah? That's how little there is of a contemplative. That is, that a tiny amount of water, yeah, in this dipper, yeah, which is left over. He says that's what it's like for a person who, now notice the word deliberately, yeah, tells a deliberate lie. Yeah, because all of us, well, I think anyway, all of us tell lies all the time to ourselves. When we're spinning our stories, we're quite often fabricating things. I don't mean that we do it deliberately, but it just happens, and quite often, when we think about our spiritual life, we can often be weaving funny little sort of not quite true things. So he says, this is what it's like for a person who feels no shame at telling a deliberate lie. Now we could think of the very recent past of a number of very famous people who would fit into this category, of telling deliberate lies and having no shame at all about it. Then the Buddha tosses away the little bit of water. Now, this is interesting because in the later monastic rule, you're not allowed to do that. You can't just throw water anywhere willy-nilly. Yeah, has to be put somewhere in particular, so because you might destroy life that's in the water. But in this story, which comes from a very early period, the Buddha tosses a little bit of water away, and he says to Rahula, "Do you see how this little bit of leftover water is tossed away?" And Rahula says, "Yes." And then he says, "Whatever there is of a contemplative, that is, a person who's pursuing a spiritual path, in anyone who feels no shame at telling a deliberate lie is tossed away just like that." Right? So it's like you kind of give yourself away. You abandon yourself. Yeah? It's like, in a way you could say it's a sort of betrayal of yourself. Then the Buddha takes this image further and he turns the water dipper upside down. And he says, "See how this water dipper is turned upside down?" And Rahula says, "Yes." And then he says, "Whatever there is of a contemplative, of someone trying to practice the spiritual life, who feels no shame at telling a deliberate lie, is turned upside down just like that." Now, this is also a practice in Buddhist monasticism, at least in the Theravadan tradition. If monks and nuns are in a village and there are lay people in the village who want to offer food, want to offer dana to them, but it's known publicly that these people have committed some major offence or crime, then I haven't got one here, but anyway, then the monks or the nuns will turn their bowl over. In other words, they're not going to receive what's being offered. Yeah? It's called inverting the butt, turning it over. And so there's a suggestion of this here, yeah, that when it's turned over, you won't receive anything. Yeah? You can't receive anything because you're no longer capable of being open to receive it. There's a very famous incident in Thailand in 1976 in October when the military laid siege to Thammasat University and murdered a lot of students and lecturers, so much so that the blood was running down the small narrow gutters in the university into the river behind, into the Chao Phraya River, and they hung students from the trees, they butchered lecturers and so on. This was all supposedly to do with anti-communism at the time. The next day, after this had happened, senior military figures turned up at Wat Mahathat, which was a monastery that I used to often stay at, which is right next to Thammasat University, to offer dana to the monks. And all the monks sat in the gateways of the monastery and turned their bowls over. And so they had to go away, publicly disgraced. And the king of Thailand finally ordered them back to their barracks. And they went because they weren't going to until he actually came out and ordered them away. So this is like a very powerful image. This idea of turning the thing over so that it can't be used for what it's actually meant to be used for, to receive something. So the Buddha then continues. He says, whatever there is of a person practicing the spiritual life, in anyone who feels no shame at telling a deliberate lie, is empty and hollow, just like that. Rahula, it's like a royal elephant, immense, pedigreed, accustomed to battles, its tusks like chariot poles. Having gone into battle, it uses its forefeet, its hind feet, its forequarters, its hindquarters, its head and its ears and tusk and tail, but it keeps protecting its trunk. The elephant trainer notices this and thinks, this royal elephant has not given up its life to the king. So the royal elephant in this image, it holds back. It's protecting something, yeah, which is also what's happening if we are engaged in this deliberate lying process. We're trying to protect, we could say we're trying to protect the self or ourself from what's real, from what's actually in front of us. And then the royal elephant, having gone into battle, uses its forefeet, hind feet, forequarters, hindquarters, its head, its ears, tusk, tail, and trunk the trainer notices this and thinks, this royal elephant has given up its life to the king. There is nothing that it will not do. So in this way, the Buddha is trying to create a very graphic image for Rahula, who remembers a boy. Yeah, he's not an adult. He's a boy. So there'd be images that, especially the elephant image, would appeal to him. And the Buddha says, so Rahula, you should train yourself. I will not tell a deliberate lie, even in jest. Right? So I will not tell a deliberate lie, even in jest. Then comes, I think, really fantastic part of this teaching. The Buddha then leaps from there and says, what do you think, Rahula, what is a mirror for? And Rahula says, for reflection. Yeah, that is, for seeing oneself in. Yeah. And the Buddha continues, in the same way, Rahula, bodily actions, verbal actions, and mental actions should be done with repeated reflection. Yeah. Bodily actions, verbal actions, and mental actions should be done with repeated reflection, looking into them. And then the Buddha makes it a little bit clearer in case Rahula doesn't understand it. Excuse me. Whenever you want to do a bodily action, you should reflect on it in this way. This bodily action I want to do, would it lead to self-affliction? Would it lead to the affliction of others, or to both? Would it be an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results? If on reflection, you know that it would lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both, it would be an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results, then any bodily action of that sort is absolutely unfit for you to do. To me, this is very timely if you think about the great deal of emphasis that's now being placed on this whole idea of domestic violence, for example. Yeah, because it arises out of absolutely unreflective, action, bodily action. Well, and the Buddha continues. He says, "But if on reflection you know that it would not cause affliction, then it would be a skillful bodily action with pleasant consequences, pleasant results. Then any bodily action of that sort is fit for you to do." So he's making it very, very concrete, starting with the body itself. He goes on and says, while you're doing a bodily action, you should reflect on it in this way. This bodily action I am doing, is it leading to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? Is it an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences or painful results? If on reflection you know that it is leading to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both, you should give it up. But if on reflection you know that it is not, then you may continue with it. So the Buddha looks at, looking at the action before it's arising, as it's arising, and then as it actually has arisen. And then he says, this bodily action that I have done, did it lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? Was it unskillful with painful consequences, painful results? And he says, if it is, this is an interesting, he says, if it was an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results, then you should confess it, reveal it, lay it open to the teacher or to a companion in the holy life. So you shouldn't keep it covered up. You shouldn't keep it secret. Yeah, you should actually present it to somebody else. This is very unpopular these days, the whole idea of confession. In the monastic tradition, we have confession twice a month, traditionally, before the recitation of the Patimokkha. And it's very interesting because you kneel in front of another monk or the nuns. I think the nuns do this too, don't they, Sudhira? Yeah. And you say to the other monk or the nun, these are the things that I've done, that are unskillful, unwholesome, and so on. And the response of the person listening is very interesting. They don't say, "Oh, you're bloody hopeless, you know. Yeah, surely by now, you know." No, they say, "Do you see what you've done? Yeah. Do you see what you've done?" And you say, "Yes, Bhante, yeah, yes, I do see." And then the response is, then make an effort in future. Yeah, make an effort. And then the person listening to the confession says, "May you also forgive me." Yeah. And sometimes it can be very, very strange experience, because sometimes the person that you are confessing to, like in my case, was often my teacher, who was very, 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 very senior. Yeah. And then he would confess to me. And I'd say, "Do you see what you've done?" But it's very interesting, isn't it, that here the Buddha encourages us to first of all investigate it in all those different stages. And then if we recognize, okay, yeah, this wasn't very good, then to actually say something or to put it in front of somebody. But notice it's somebody you have to trust. You know, it's not just sort of getting around saying, "Oh, I'm hopeless," and so on. So it has to, you know, it has to have a particular context. You know? And then the Buddha goes on and says that you should stay mentally refreshed and joyful, training night and day with these skillful mental qualities. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, because the Buddha then moves on to what he calls verbal action. That is our speech. And here, it's not just about what we say, so to speak, outwardly, but also the inward speech, which then feeds into the next section, which is mental action. Yeah? And the same advice is given. You know, is this something which is going to be harmful to me, harmful to others, harmful to both? Then I better reflect on it very, very carefully, and I better let go of it. You know? And if I recognize that no, it's not, then okay, then I can encourage it and I can learn from it as it's arising, as it's fully arisen, and as I recognize what has just passed. So this is only a short teaching that's in this sutta, but I think it's a very, very valuable one. You know? Towards the end, the Buddha says all of those contemplatives in the course of the past. So here the Buddha is talking about everyone who's been before and who's tried to practice, who've purified their bodily action, verbal action, and mental action, did it through repeated reflection on their bodily action, their verbal action, and their mental action in just this way. Repeated reflection, though, does not mean obsessive. It doesn't mean I sit around all day and think, "Oh," yeah. No, it just means that I cultivate that awareness. And you can see why it's so valuable, because then you can catch yourself before you do something, or catch yourself before you say something, or catch yourself as you're kind of thinking something which is not helpful, not skillful, not wholesome, and so on. Or you can catch yourself as you are doing something which is skillful and wholesome and beneficial, and then foster that, encourage that. And the Buddha says you should train in this way day and night. So that's the first little teaching, and you can have a look at that yourself. It's in Majjhima Nikaya 6.1. And the Buddha wants to encourage Rahula to make progress in this way, to be aware, continuously be aware of the body, speech, and mind. Not to be mindless, if you like. And it's interesting, at the same time, to be aware of others. So it's not all just about me, you know, and my spiritual path and so on. No, it's about how do these things affect other people around me. So it's a very valuable, I think anyway, very valuable little teaching. And we can, if we take it in and think about it and use the images that the Buddha uses. You know, the image of the dipper with the water in it, and the image of the dipper turned upside down, which means it's completely useless as a dipper, which is what it's meant to be. And the idea of reflecting, you know, what is a mirror for? It's for reflection, it's for seeing into. Then I think we can gain a great deal. The chant we did tonight, the Iti Piso, you know, is called in English the mirror of the Dhamma. You know, the mirror of the Dhamma. The idea being that the three things, the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, yeah, when they're put together like that in the Iti Piso, they are a mirror. What's a mirror for? It's for reflecting, for, you could say, for seeing myself in. You know? So as I practice, I should be able to see myself in this mirror of the Dhamma. So I'm not looking for the Buddha out there. Yeah, I'm not looking for the Buddha here, yeah, but I'm looking for the Buddha here. Yeah? And similarly for the Dhamma, I'm not looking for the Dhamma in books and theories and all sorts of things. I'm looking for the Dhamma here as I experience it, not as I construct it, but as I experience it. And Sangha, well, it's right here. So I think it's a really beautiful little teaching. Also, I think it's caught up a little bit with something that the Buddha often talked about, and that is being in harmony or being in tune. Yeah, the Buddha liked to use sometimes these musical images, or or metaphors. So if we're in harmony, if we're in tune, then whatever we do, whatever we think, whatever we say, is good for ourselves and good for others. Yeah, is beneficial to ourselves, beneficial to others. Notice that the Buddha does not encourage Rahula to put everybody else first. You know, think about others. No, it's the two things together. It's oneself and others. You know? So the Buddha's not big on, you know, ideas of making myself a martyr, you know, for others, but rather having this balanced condition within the body, the heart, the mind. So that's the first little teaching. Now, in the second one, which is the one, the sutta of great advice to Rahula, Maha Rahula Ovada. Ovada means advice. This one is, I think, it flows from the previous one, and it develops some of these very, very concrete images. In this one, we find the Buddha staying at Anathapindika's monastery in Jeta's Grove. In this one, it says, the Buddha, early in the morning, put on his robes and carrying his bowl and outer robe, went into Savatthi for alms. So early in the morning, in the Theravadan tradition, you have to wait until you can see the lines on your hand. Yeah, so you go out into the courtyard of the monastery and you have a look. If you can't see the lines, then you can't walk out the gate. You have to wait until you can see them, till there's enough light so you can see them, and then you can exit and go on alms round. You can't take a torch so you can see them. So the Buddha does this, and an interesting thing is in this, which has caused quite a deal of discussion and controversy, is the Buddha puts on his robes and carrying his bowl and outer robe. So he's got his robes, bowl, and outer robe, which in the Thai tradition is the sangati, the long strip of cloth that's down here, which is really just another outer robe folded up. It says he went into Savatthi for alms, and following right behind the Buddha came Rahula. So he quickly puts on his robe, gets his bowl and everything, and walks right behind the Buddha. So you get this image of the Buddha walking steadily, slowly, and Rahula sort of running along behind, following the Buddha. And then the Buddha stops and turns and looks back at Rahula and says, Rahula, any form whatsoever, past, future or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near, every form should be seen as it actually is, with the right discernment. This is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am. So Rahula, you can see, I think the suggestion is that Rahula, in a way, is fixated on the Buddha, and the Buddha as his father, the Buddha as teacher, the Buddha as the leader of this group of people. And so he's going to follow behind the Buddha. You could say he's going to imitate the Buddha. Yeah, he's going to walk in the Buddha's footsteps, which has been the title of quite a number of books, Buddhist books, in the footsteps of the Buddha. And the Buddha stops, yeah, and turns and says to him, Rahula, yeah, any form whatsoever, and here you could say, first of all, the Buddha's referring to himself, this form, the Buddha, yeah, past, future or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near, every form is to be seen as it actually is with right discernment. This is not mine. This is not myself. This is not what I am. So he's, in a way, he's telling Rahula what he also told other disciples when he said that he is Tathagata. Remember the wonderful story where the disciple or the man says to him, who are you? Are you a god? And the Buddha says, no. You know, are you a demon? No. You know, are you? And then he says, finally, are you a man? And the Buddha says, no. Yeah. And he says, well, what are you? And the Buddha says, I am Tathagata. You know, and the rough translation of that would be, I am the one who is not here. In other words, I'm no longer bound by these categories. And in this one, he's saying to Rahula, be very careful, Rahula, that you don't identify yourself with this form, yeah? And you don't identify, so to speak, me with this form, the Buddha. Then Rahula replies, just form? Like, do you mean just form? And then, of course, the Buddha spills the beans. The Buddha says, form, Rahula, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness. That is the skandhas. Yeah, the things that we normally think of, and this is very rough, really, if you think about it, because there are other ways there are other things we could apply to our experience. But form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness. So all these things that we normally identify as me or mine or as belonging to me, the Buddha says, no, it's not. It's not just form, not just the physical form, but all these other things as well. Rahula then feels a bit embarrassed, yeah, as we can sometimes when we come face to face with with something where we realize we've completely misinterpreted what's going on. And Rahula says to himself, well, who, having been exhorted face to face by the Buddha, could possibly go into town for alms today? So in other words, he feels too embarrassed now. I can't possibly continue. The Buddha continues on. Rahula turns around and goes back to where they were staying. So he turned back and sat down at the foot of a tree, folding his legs crosswise, holding his body erect, and setting mindfulness to the fore. Now, notice it's not mindfulness of something. It's just setting mindfulness to the fore. So being mindful of what he's doing. And of course, he's adopting that classic image of sitting at the foot of the tree, you know, becoming the center or the axis mundi. Then Sariputta sees Rahula sitting at the foot of a tree, his legs crossed, his body held erect, with mindfulness set to the fore. On seeing him, Sariputta says, Rahula, develop meditation of mindfulness of in and out breathing. So here's Sariputta going past, sees this young fellow there and says, "Oh, you should be doing mindfulness of breathing, in and out breathing, in and out breathing." Because, he says, the meditation of mindfulness of in and out breathing, when developed and pursued, is of great fruit and great benefit. So, Rahula, right, I'm going to try this, as we've all done at one time or another, successfully or unsuccessfully. Sometimes very successfully, sometimes not so successfully. So Rahula tries. He tries all day. And it says in the text, in the late afternoon, he goes to the Buddha because he just hasn't got anywhere with it. And he says, having bowed down and sat to one side, he says to the Buddha, "How is it that mindfulness of in and out breathing to be developed and pursued so as to be of great fruit and great benefit?" And then the Buddha returns to what he said to Rahula first thing that morning. "Rahula, any form whatsoever that is past, future or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near, every form is to be seen as it actually is with right discernment. This is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am." So he brings him back, and in a way we can see this is an attempt to get Rahula to, in a way, loosen up a bit. Not to, I've got to do this mindfulness of breathing and like lock onto it, and and then I'll be this wonderful meditator because Sariputta says that this is the thing to do. And instead of answering him, the Buddha says, "No. You have to recognize with right discernment, this is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am." And this is, I think this is very important for meditation practice, that we recognize that when we're practicing, this is not mine, this is not myself, this doesn't belong to me. Otherwise, we're turning our practice into some sort of object that we can hang on to or put in a box, put on a shrine. So then the Buddha continues, and I think this is a really fantastic teaching. He says, excuse me, he doesn't say excuse me, he says, "There are these 5 properties, Rahula." Which 5? The earth property, the water property, Sue did something on this recently, the fire property, the wind property, and space property, right? Now, he's just said to Rahula, this is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am. And then he's going to talk about the elements. And the elements in the pre-Buddhist tradition and in the Buddhist tradition, very, very important because they cover all sorts of aspects of what it is to be a human being. We tend not to pay much attention to them anymore today. Although, with climate change, perhaps we should. So the Buddha goes on. What is the earth property? So now he's going to teach Rahula in very concrete terms. The earth property can be either internal or external. What is the internal earth property? It's anything internal within oneself that's hard, solid, sustained. It says sustained, and then one of the commentators has put by craving. Head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, tendons, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, hearts, liver, membrane, spleen, lungs, large intestine, small intestine, contents of the stomach, feces, anything else internal within oneself that's hard, solid, and sustained. So you can see the list goes on and on and on. When a person becomes a monk, and I think the nuns do this too, you have to recite this list in Pali. Yes, Kesa, Loma, Nacha, Tacho. Yeah, it goes on and on and on and on. So the Buddha says, okay, this is the earth property as we experience it with the body. It's whatever's sort of solid in the body. And that would include bones, of course, as well. And he says, but This is called internal. Now, both internal earth property and external earth property is this, and this. Yeah. It should be seen as it actually is present. Yeah. This is not mine. This is not me. This is not myself. So the Buddha's emphasizing this kind of discernment, yeah, seeing clearly, as he says in Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, seeing clearly as it is. Yeah. This is not me. Yeah. The me, if you like, is a label that I've attached to these things. Yeah. And it's quite clear that this is not me either, despite what property prices might do going up and down. The property is not really me. So the Buddha then continues. He says, it should be seen as it actually is. When you see it as it is actually present with right discernment, you become disenchanted. That is, you become uninclined to grab hold of it, to identify yourself with it. And then he says, and this makes the earth property fade from the mind. So it loosens that grasping after this idea of solidity in whatever form it might take. The Buddha then moves through the other elements, through the water property. And of course, you can think of what's watery inside yourself. And there's a great long list again. Bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, oil, saliva, and so on. Yeah. And then the water property outside, the external water property. And the Buddha once again says, this is not me, this is not mine. I do not belong to this doesn't belong to me. Fire property, the same. Yeah? The idea of heat, internal heat. Yeah? And we need, for ourselves, we need internal heat in order to promote things like food digestion and so on. And then, but we also then have heat outside. The wind property, yeah, maybe internal or external. I used to live once next door to a monk who was very, very famous for farting. And people used to say the wind property. Yes, he used to eat a strange kind of, I don't know what you'd call it. It was like a vine that had sort of bumpy bits all over it, and he used to it was considered a medicine, so therefore he was able to eat it after midday. He used to spend the whole day chewing on this stuff, and the result was amazing amounts of wind. So the Buddha says, okay, then there's wind in and out of the body, and remember, of course, there's also these early medical theories about winds within the body, moving up and down through channels and so on. And then the Buddha says, so there's the internal wind properties, and then there's external wind properties. Yeah, and you know what it's like when we experience the external wind, and you've got those wonderful stories in the Chan and Zen tradition. You know, it's the wind moving. No, it's the flag moving, and no, the answer is it's the mind that's moving. Yeah. So, and then finally, the space property can be internal or external. Yeah. And of course, we all know, we've all got ears, nose, mouth, and so on, and lungs, and so on, all of which are, if you like, a manifestation of the space property. And then we've got the space, external space. And the Buddha says, if we see it as it actually is, that is, it's not mine, it's not me, it's not myself, then we become disenchanted with it. And I think it's a really good word, because if we're enchanted by something, that word literally means that we've been captured by something. It's a word that appears in lots of folklore. Witches and wizards can enchant somebody so that they lose control. They're under the control of somebody else. So the Buddha says you become disenchanted with this space property, and the space property can then fade from the mind. Notice he doesn't say the space property is destroyed, yeah? But rather the grasping after it, the hanging onto it, whatever it might be, is able to fade away. And then Then comes, I think, the really beautiful bit, and this is the bit where we can really take to heart. He says, Rahula, develop meditation in tune with the earth. In tune with the earth. And again, you've got this idea of being in harmony with something. He says, when you develop meditation that's in tune with the earth, excuse me, agreeable and disagreeable sensory impressions that have arisen will not stay in charge of your mind. And why? He says, because just as when people throw what is clean or unclean onto the earth, feces, urine, saliva, pus, or blood, the earth is not horrified. The earth is not humiliated. The earth is not disgusted by it. In the same way, when you're developing the meditation in tune with the earth, agreeable and disagreeable sensory impressions that have arisen will not stay within the mind. I think this is it's very beautiful because you can actually apply it in a practical way in your meditation practice. If you try to practice in such a way that you use that image of the earth, no matter what falls upon it, no matter what's cast upon it, the earth does not react to it. And so when we're practicing meditation, we don't react to whatever arises. Yeah? It arises, comes into being, it passes away. Whether it's bodily, verbal, mental, whether it involves the earth element or the water element. Remember, excuse me, in the Buddhist tradition, there's a, pardon me, there is a meditation practice which you can find in the Visuddhimagga called kasina practice. Yeah? And this is using the elements to practice meditation with. Yeah? And so you construct a kasina. So the earth kasina is made by taking a disc, making a clay disc, yeah, and then you focus on the clay disc, on this earth quality, yeah, and you do it with all the other elements. And I think I've told you before, we in my monastery in Thailand, we once decided we do the fire kasina, yeah? And the fire kasina involves getting a big piece of cotton, like a cotton material, and you cut a hole, very carefully cut a disc hole in the middle, and you put some bamboo poles at each end. So you stretch it out like a screen, and you build a fire behind it so that when you look through the hole, you're just seeing the middle of the fire. You're not seeing the fuel, you're not seeing the top of the fire, and so on. Yeah? And the idea is that you continue to focus upon the fire. Yeah. But when we did it, unfortunately, the wind changed direction and the whole thing caught fire, and that was the end of a very short practice, kasina practice. So here the Buddha is saying, though, look, try to, so to speak, try to take this into yourself. So when you practice, make your practice like the earth. Make your practice like the water. And if you think about it, you know, the Buddha talks about it being vast and spacious and open. Yeah. Not water like in a glass of water, but immense. Yeah. And the same for fire. There's no need to go through all of them here for wind, for space. Yeah. So he runs through the elements. Yeah. He's constantly saying to Rahula, look, recognize this is not me, it's not mine. I don't belong to this, it doesn't belong to me. And then look at, so to speak, the way that we identify with ourselves through the elements. Look at the way that we use or misuse body, speech, and mind, and reflect upon that. And then finally, remember, at this stage, he's not said a word about meditation on the breath at this stage. It's quite a long teaching. So maybe Rahula's kind of thinking, oh, well, I don't know if he's going to get to this or not. And then the Buddha suddenly says, develop meditation after the elements, develop the meditation of loving kindness. Yeah, develop. And you can see why, because it is also spacious. Yeah. It's not focusing in like this, it's opening out. And he says, because if you develop this meditation, ill will be abandoned. It will fade from the mind. And then, this is no surprise, of course, to any of you, the next thing he says is develop the meditation of compassion, of karuna. Because when you are developing this meditation, cruelty will be abandoned. It's important to remember it's cruelty not just towards others, but towards oneself as well, because we can be very cruel to ourselves at times, and not have much loving kindness towards ourselves. And then develop the meditation of mudita, or joyfulness, with the well-being and happiness of others, including ourselves, of course. For when you develop this meditation, resentment will be abandoned. Why not me? How come it happens to, these good things? They always win the lottery. They always get the good job. They were born with the good looks, and so on. And then the final one, of course, there's no prizes for guests. You can see what the Buddha's doing here with the Brahma Viharas. The final one, the Buddha says, develop the meditation of equanimity, which is right through all those images of the earth, the water, the fire, the air, and so on. When you are developing, notice the idea of continuous tense there, the meditation of equanimity, irritation will be abandoned and fade away. Irritation will be abandoned and fade away. So this, I think this is a really good teaching, because it's very, very concrete. You can do things with it. So having done the Brahma Viharas, then the Buddha says, develop the meditation of the unattractive. The unattractive is, looking at what's unpleasant. And if you look at it, then the grasping or the passion that can arise will fade away, will be abandoned. The next one, develop the meditation of the perception of, in this translation it says inconstancy, that is impermanence. So notice he hasn't touched on mindfulness of breathing at all. He's rather gone through all these different steps. Try to do this, try to do this, try to do this. And then the final one, develop the meditation of impermanence. So, look at impermanence, your own experience of it. And of course, all those previous meditations have exposed that as well. This is not me, this is not mine, I'm not these. And then finally, after all this, he says, develop the meditation of mindfulness of breathing. After all of these, poor Rahul is probably exhausted anyway by this time, thinking, oh, how am I ever going to do all these? And the Buddha says, because when it's developed, when it's pursued, it is of great fruit and great benefit. And then he says, how do you do this? He says, having gone to the wilderness, to the shade of a tree, to an empty building, you sit down, fold your legs, hold the body erect, set mindfulness to the fore, and be mindful as you breathe in and as you breathe out. As you breathe in, be aware of the length of the breath. I'm breathing in long, or I'm breathing out long. I'm breathing in short, or I'm breathing out short. So it's again, it's as though he's led Rahula through all these pathways to this final pathway where Rahula can actually rest and just breathe. He's sort of let go of all these other things. And now he can actually practice this because that's all he needs to do. And he recognizes, of course, that the body itself and the breath itself is not me. It's not mine. I don't own it. I don't belong to it. So that teaching, which is longer than the first one, I think is of great benefit if we take it and if we try to practice it. And I'd suggest to you, you can take just one element of it and practice with that. whatever it might be, whether it's the perception of impermanence, whether it's practicing one or all four of the Brahma Viharas, whether it's practicing with the elements themselves, and practice with that, and slowly, then reach the point where you can let go of things and just sit with the breath. Yeah. Instead of trying to sort of start with the breath and construct something that like building a cage for yourself. Because what the Buddha's doing is actually sort of making the thing broader and broader and broader, opening it out. So we might stop there, because that's an awful lot of Sutta material that I hope might be useful to you. And you can always chase it up. So it's in the Majjhima Nikaya number 61 and number 62. They follow immediately after each other. And we might do a little bit of meditation practice. And if you want to ask any questions while we're here, before we do some practice, but keep them to the point. Yeah. Don't make them so broad that they sort of become like water running all over the place. Excuse me. And if not, we just do some practice. Okay, practice is better. Okay. So let's try, in this little period of practice, to follow the Buddha's advice and to use, so to speak, to take some of those images into ourselves as we practice. So let's begin our practice together tonight with a little confessional ritual. Where we call to mind what we've done, which might be unwholesome, unskillful. We call it to mind. We acknowledge it before the Buddha, before the Dhamma, before the Sangha, and then we put it aside. We cast it behind us and we move forward. Kayana wa wache tasawa Buddha kukamang pakatang mayang Buddha padikan tuan chian tang kalantare samwaritung wa Buddha. Kayana wa wache tasawa dami kukamang pakatang mayang dhamma padikan tuan chian tang kalantare samwaritung wa dhamma. Kayana wa wache tasawa sangi kukamang pakatang mayang sangha padikan tuan chian tang kalantare samwaritung wa sangha. So no hanging on to what's past. And in this short period of practice, attempting to be really true, to be really honest, to just be present with what's actually there, to not be like the dipper with a little tiny bit of water in it that's useless or turned upside down, but rather to be open to experience the Dhamma with the body, the heart, the mind. Let yourself dwell for a little while on the earth element as you experience it right now, right here in the body, a concrete, solid experience. Sitting on the chair, feeling the body. That experience of solidity in the body. Recalling the words of the Buddha, this is not me, this is not mine, this does not belong to me. This experience of the earth element, internally and externally. And call to mind that reflection of the Buddha on how the earth does not react to things that are thrown upon it. But rather remains open and expansive and vast. So that whatever arises can be received in the same manner. Great openness and spaciousness. And seen for what it is. Not me, not mine, this does not belong to me. And call to mind the water element. You might think of how much of this body is actually composed of water. How much of this body has the the quality of fluidity. And how the external element of water does not react, in the words of the Buddha, does not react with horror or rejection to whatever happens to be cast upon it. We try to let our practice be like that. No matter what arises, it just arises and passes away. vast and broad and expansive and open and spacious. So the internal and external element of water open into each other. Just let yourself be willing to allow your practice to open and expand. Reminding yourself, this is not mine, this does not belong to me, I am not this. Neither the element or the practice itself. And let yourself touch any of those elements. And as you practice with the elements, let yourself rest into them. Let the awareness of them help you to become more spacious and more open. Letting go of all constriction and restriction. And as you rest in that openness, that spaciousness, that vastness, letting go of that distinction between the internal and the external, just allow some loving kindness to arise within the body, heart, and mind. And let it also flow and expand out. Allow loving kindness itself to become spacious and vast and open. No limits, no restrictions. Just a body, heart, and mind filled with loving kindness. No need to hang on, no need to fear. This is not mine, I'm not these. These don't belong to me. A great ocean of loving kindness arising within the heart and mind. You can use words if it helps you. May I be well, may I be happy. May all beings be well, may all beings be happy. May I and all beings be free from suffering and its causes. May we know happiness and the causes of happiness. Or you can just rest in that great ocean of loving kindness for oneself and for all suffering sentient beings. This loving kindness which knows no limit. Which is inexhaustible. just as all the rivers and streams in the world flow toward the ocean. So in these very moments, may all that is good and wholesome, skillful and beneficial flow toward you, just as all that is harmful, unwholesome and unskillful flows away from you. Yatha varivahapura paripurenti sagarang ewang me wangi todinang petanang upakapati chitang paditang tonghang kipameva samitatu sabe parentu sankapa chantopanara soyata mani jatira soyata Sapitio aveva tanto saparoko vina satuma te bhava vantarayo sukiti kayoko bhava aveva anasili sani changutang pachayino ja taro tammavatan the Ayuano Sukang Palang.